Wow.
I could not in my head, like, how does someone with 27 years go out? That doesn't happen. Like, you're cured, right? Like,
I think it's dangerous to have no space within your belief systems.
there's always a need for growth and evolution. The kind of conversations you and I used to have 12, 13 years ago
For sure.
are not the conversations that we're having today.
No, I have a way of doing things or going about my life that's not working. Like, I'm unhappy living life the way that I'm living it, and it's not working. It's like, does that pain drive the openness, or does the openness come first? What's up, guys, and welcome to the No Nonsense Podcast. I'm here today with my very close friend, Demond Burwell.
What's up, guys?
Demond, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
And so Demond is a really close friend of mine, and we have really insightful conversations together all the time. Somebody I really enjoy talking to, somebody that challenges me intellectually and has me think about some things. And actually, I've had conversations with Demond that have changed my mind about things that I have held. That I've held as beliefs, right? And then having conversations and just being open to what's coming across to me, like upon further reflection, I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm open to seeing where where he's coming from with this, and it's actually allowed me to create a new belief system, or like based on this evidence and everything that I hold true to me. Like I'm actually willing to let go of my old belief system that was the way.
Sure.
I think is probably like the most accurate way to describe that process.
And you've done the same for me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's cool. I think it's a cool experience. I think it's something that I hope everybody has in their life, is people in their lives that they respect enough that they don't necessarily see eye to eye on every specific thing. That does open up some dialogue to create some space with your belief systems. I think, like you and I were talking about this before the show, I think it's dangerous to have no space within your belief systems.
sure. But, at the same time, like, that safety has to be created, and that willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we weren't able to have this. I know I couldn't have these kinds of conversations, or wasn't willing to have these conversations, until I became willing to be vulnerable and open to the possibility that, like, my worldview wasn't absolute.
Right.
And there was I think the underpinning was a willingness to grow.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I'm not willing to grow, then I'm not going to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. I'd say that's a great way to put it, right? It's like, what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg with that, right? I think for me, I gotta think that it's the willingness to grow, right? I gotta think it's the being sick and tired of where I'm currently at, right? Sure. And so maybe this starts to get opened up with like, I have a way of doing things or going about my life that's not working. Like, I'm unhappy living life the way that I'm living it, and it's not working. It's like, does that pain drive the openness, or does the openness come first, do you think?
Yeah, something one of my mentors taught me a long time ago is that unless the pain of remaining the same
Right.
is greater than the pain of change, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
So I would love to say, like, I had this willingness to grow, but my willingness to grow was directly related to my willingness to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And a lot of times that willingness to be uncomfortable is like, well, I'll go here.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to push through.
Yeah.
Right. And so to be able to push through, we've talked about this before, like, I need people like you in my life, or Dom or others. I need those kinds of people in my life, because I'm not always going to want to push through.
Right.
I'm going to choose to recede. I'm going to choose what I view as comfort, which is really just familiarity.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I'm not allowing, myself to be challenged or open to be challenged, when it's like pushing reps, right? It's like I get to 7 and it's like it starts to hurt and that lactic acid is building up. I don't want to do 8.
Right.
Which is why you have training partners or a trainer to help you push through that. And I think it's the same thing here. I firmly believe that, is that I have to have training partners
Yeah.
in terms of my life,
Right.
in order to push through, in order to grow. And then as I start to experience that, then the willingness to grow happens more.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're saying is dead on, right? Having that training partner really makes it easier to get that last rep, those
Yeah.
last couple reps, or to push past the threshold of those reps. You know, so like as I'm talking about, like, yeah, some of the conversations that we have, you know, and where I've changed my mind, some of it's been like, you know, political, social issue stuff. But I think to your point, we got the ability to go there and change our mind about stuff there with each other because we were able to go to like some of the deeper personal stuff and like
100%.
challenge each other on the deeper personal stuff, right? And yeah, I think my experience in talking to so many people, right, and I think one of the reasons people come to me professionally is because in their life they don't feel like they have that.
Yeah.
Right. In their life, they don't have places that they can go where they can be challenged from a place of love. Like, hey, I'm not telling you you need to be different, like for any other reason than I think that you're holding yourself back, or I think that you're holding yourself small, and I want to be able to support you and call you forward.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So one of the things I was really excited to dive in with you today about, and I there's so much that you and I could talk about,
Sure.
right? So much that you and I could talk about, but you and I both have a long history in substance abuse recovery and
Yes.
and our journeys with substance abuse recovery, and just some of the things that we've seen within the 12-step programs that were like, a lot of things that we've taken within 12-step programs that felt like they were kind of dogmatic.
Where I am today in my beliefs is not where I was. And
Right.
and the funny thing is, like, in a certain respect, like some of my disagreement or disdain, I'll call it, mirrors a lot of the fear that I had when I first started this journey 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I think like it's an important thing to start, like, to come in from, like, when you're coming into 12-step programs, right? You're like, okay, this seems to be a place that works for at least a few people that I've met or whatever that have told me, like, yeah, you can get sober here, right? Or like you can stop living this addictive life if you come here and do it, and you don't even know what that means, right? You're like, all right, I don't know what these people do. I've never been to a meeting. So you start going to 12-step meetings, or I start going to 12-step meetings, and I just assume everybody there is doing the same thing, right? That they're all like, it's this homogenous sort of experience that you go there and like everybody. And I was like, oh, everybody's saying different things about what this actually is to begin with, right? But I don't know anything. Like, some of these people are clearly sober and they've been sober for a long time. I am barely alive, right? So I'm going to listen to what these people have to say, even though, and it took me a little while to figure out that they're not all saying the same thing,
Yeah.
that they're not all doing the same thing. And that I'm taking everybody there's word as gospel in the beginning because I'm just this like desperate sponge.
You were better than me.
You're better than me.
Bro, I thought everybody, and I'll tell this to your viewers, I thought everybody in 12-step programs was full of shit. Like, it was so foreign to me, this idea that I could live a happy and fulfilling life without drugs and alcohol.
So you thought they were lying when you say full of shit?
I thought they were
Yeah.
full of shit. People
Yeah.
talking, you know, like go into meetings and people taking 5 years and 20 years without drinking or using drugs. Fuck out of here.
Right.
Like, I didn't believe it. That was so foreign to me. And looking back, I know why it was so foreign to me, because I was in so much pain.
Yeah.
And I could not see beyond my own pain, my own grief, my own trauma, my own frustration, my own shame, my own guilt, right? Like, I couldn't see past those things. And so if you actually were that person, then I didn't want to fuck with you, right? Because it's like, well, now you're better than me.
Right.
And in the streets, you can't be better than me.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, so I brought that game, that mentality into recovering from substance abuse and trauma and all the other things. And so it took me a little while to get to where you were in terms of like my belief that I was like, okay, like these people know something that I don't. But then real quickly, the game mentality in my head, right? Like, because I originally got my original experience was up in the Bay Area,
Okay.
and so,
How old were you at the time?
22,
Okay.
and all I knew how to do was sell dope and throw parties,
Right.
run nightclubs and stuff like that. And so all I knew was the hustler mindset. And so that's what I look for. And then I saw people that look like me. And I started to believe, I was like, oh, these people, are turning their life around and they're doing something different and stuff like that. But then finding out, like, some of them were boosters and pimps.
Oh, yeah.
And prostitutes and hustlers. And I was like, oh, so all I got to do is figure out how to not pick up and I can continue to live the life that I'm living.
Right.
So like that's what I grabbed onto, right? Because I was not willing. We were just talking about vulnerability, right? And the willingness to be open and the willingness to grow. I really wasn't willing to grow.
Yeah, totally.
I just wanted to get the heat off.
Yeah.
I wanted my ex-wife off my back. I wanted my family off my back. I wanted to go back to Miami and continue to do my thing. But I knew I had created enough heat on myself that I needed to get that heat off of me. So really what it is, and I've said this for years, there's a vast difference between wanting relief and wanting change.
Yeah. Some people just want to stop suffering and they don't want to do the actual work.
And so I think a lot of people, at least, well, I can speak for myself. When I came in, all I wanted was relief. I didn't want change. Yeah. The idea of change sound good, but the level of responsibility and accountability that I learned that comes with that, nah, son, I wasn't willing to do that.
That makes sense. Yeah. So for me, I was so beaten down. My first AA meeting, my first 12-step meeting, I was 15. What's like an Alateen meeting or some shit like that. My first AA meeting, I was 17. I got sober when I was 23. By the time, when I first came there in 17, I wanted to stop suffering. When I got there at 23, I was ready to change.
Yeah, you were done.
I was done. And so because I was done, I was so done, I was willing to listen to anything these people said. So much so, I started to buy into the absolutism that I started here in the room. And that later on, that became a real problem for me, right? Because there was what I started to hear, and some of it was truth mixed in with, I think, a lot of people's interpretations, right? So it's like, yeah, you need to do the steps if you're going to recover from alcoholism. Okay, that makes sense, right? But then you start hearing, well, you're not doing the steps well enough. You're not doing the steps thorough enough. And there was sort of this like, that's not sober behavior, right? And so people started to talk about these things in a very judgmental way. Like, you do this thing and you've got to live your life a certain way. And if you don't live your life a certain way, you're going to go back.
What does that sound like?
Yeah, exactly. Very Judeo-Christian fucking, yeah. So it's like, So I started to hear a lot of that. And I bought into that for a while because I suffered so badly for the first couple of years of my sobriety, right? And even though I was ready to change, really all I deep down wanted, I was in, all right, I just got to become a famous fighter and start getting girls, and then I'll be happy, right? And so once I get mine, then I'll be okay. And that's why I was going to AA. I was going to AA to get sober so I can get mine. Then I realized, then I met a guy in Las Vegas. So 2 years sober, I moved out to Las Vegas to pursue my fight career, run out of money for my psych meds. So I used to be on all types of psych meds at the time. I was diagnosed with a bunch of things that I think I was wrongly diagnosed with. But anyway, they had me on some pretty heavy psych meds. I run out of money like within a month to get my meds. Like, I have no life skills. And I'm going crazy in these meetings. Like, nobody will even talk to me except this one guy who used to be like a bodyguard for these drug dealers, this bald dude. Like, this guy was coming to meetings strapped, shooting payphones off the wall. Like, this guy was nuts, but he knew the big book like a fucking savant. And he started taking me through the step. This is the only guy that would talk to me, right? So me and this guy start kicking it. He starts taking me through the work, through the steps. He starts introducing me to the idea that the 12 steps are not designed for you to get what you want. They're designed for you to free yourself from your selfishness. And I was like, oh, that's the exact opposite of what I've been doing, right? And that started to give me some, not just relief, but that started to give me a hope, because whatever I was doing in the rooms prior to that, going to meetings, sharing, sure, I went through the steps with some people and in a way that I didn't think was the most effective, but I was sober. And this, whatever he was saying, that it felt like there was some truth in what he was saying, but there was also this absolute attached to it of like we gotta, if we're we gotta move away from selfishness or we're gonna die, right? And it's like, so I took that to the other extreme, and that could definitely be my interpretation. It was like, oh, any trace of selfishness means I'm doing something wrong, right? And then like, I think my experience in 12-step rooms is humans as fallible as they are will take that judgment and extend it towards you.
Sure. I don't know about you. I needed my brain washed.
Yeah.
And I would hear that. I don't know if they say that much anymore because I don't go to as many meetings, but yeah, there was a level of brainwashing that needed to happen.
Yeah.
Because the fact is like my habits were so firm, so strong. Like I needed something to break that. So like that absolutism that you talk about, like, and this may be controversial, it may not, I don't really care. Like I look at 12-step fellowships much in the same vein as I look at the church, and like with born again Christians, it's like, and we talk about this stuff. It's like you act a certain way in your life and it causes a certain level of pain. And what I realized and what came to me as you were sharing, and what I was looking for was absolution. Yeah. It wasn't about me taking responsibility. It's like I wanted to be absolved of my sins. I wanted relief. Yeah. And so my experience, my personal experience, and what I see in others, is looking for absolution. Yeah. Right. And so within that rigid framework, I can find that if I do these things, I will be forgiven. Right. If I don't do these things, I won't be forgiven. If I don't do these things, I'm not really sober.
Yeah. It's all judgment.
Right. It's all this whole all or none. And so I think for me in the beginning, like, because I was so wild. Yeah. Because I was so oppositionally defiant. Right. Like, I needed to have that experience of fighting with those powers. Yeah. Right. And fighting with these ideas that I need to do all of these things in order to recover. Okay. What I know now is that it's so much more than that. Yeah. Right. That took me along my journey to look further within. To actually begin to take responsibility for my life. And so the challenges that I've had over the last several years is that I'm looking at it from a different lens now, right? Like I'm not taking into account what I needed at that time. Right. I'm looking at it from now, and it's like, well, that's rigid. That's dogmatic. Yeah. Like that doesn't work for me. Yeah. And well, fuck, it shouldn't work for me. Right. Right. Like after all these years. Totally. Yeah. If I still need, and this is me. Right. If I still need a dogmatic message, then how much work have I really done? Yeah. Yeah. No, I think actually that's a great way to put it. Right. So I never even thought about it. Like I was so wild. I was such a what they call like a hope to die junkie. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just one of those real down and out wild cards, right? And destructive. I needed the rigidity. I probably needed that rigidity more than anything else of that life. Like I needed to go to an extreme in order to balance out. I think what happened for me is I went to the extreme, and I was like one of those hardcore fucking big book guys and taking lots of people through the steps, and this is the way to do it. And I'm saying this in meetings, and I'm kind of believing it because that's what I've been told, right? So I'm kind of like bought into a way of thinking about this that wasn't necessarily my own. But I did have evidence that once I started thinking like this, my life did improve to some degree. What happened though, after like 10, almost 15 years sober and like really doing the thing, I'm like, is this all there is? And
and I was so lonely. And the whole time I was pretty lonely. Like my whole time in AA, I was pretty lonely. My whole time in AA, codependent, sex and love addict, all the stuff that, that I had to do other work on. Right. And people just kept telling me, well, maybe you need to do another inventory. Like maybe you need to do another fourth or fifth step.
That's the biggest lie.
Yeah.
That people are told.
Yeah. So for the viewers that aren't junkies and alcoholics, right? Which is probably a lot of you guys, luckily. There's a process within the 12 steps. And part of that process is an inventory of your resentments, your fears, relationship type stuff, deep dark secrets, that kind of shit, right? So, and the idea is to get clear with this stuff within ourselves, get clear about this stuff with your higher power and with another person, to kind of clear the slate of a lot of the energy that you may have stuck in the past, so that you can make amends for anything that needs to be made amends for, and to just start getting acquainted with the resentments and the fears and stuff that you have, and to see how those things are driving certain areas of your life. They're creating patterns that aren't working in certain areas of your life by holding on to these things, right? And so as I was going through this, people were like, yeah, you just probably need to do another inventory. And, have you written inventory on it? And have you, taken a look at, and a lot of times the idea was that I'm the problem. I'm the problem. I'm the problem. And people would constantly be well, I'm the problem. Well, it must be just there's something wrong with me in the way that, and it's always, you're taking a look at yourself, but from a lens of there's something wrong with me, or I'm bad, or I'm wrong, right? And I think the wrongness is what came across to me, and wrongness is what I see sort of kicked across the most, or communicated the most when I look at the average 12-step room. And what I know now, and doing the work that I do now, is that it is nearly impossible to create inner peace or lasting change from a place of wrongness. Like, I'm wrong, I'm bad.
Bro, it's like a hoe just going to church and being baptized and say you're not going to be a hoe anymore.
Right.
I'm probably going to piss some people off today. Okay. But the fact is there's so many parallels, and I grew up in the church. Right. So I see so many parallels with 12-step recovery in the church. And its roots in the church, the Washingtonians and the Oxford group and all of those things. And so it's a really nice message, right? Like, I can come to this place broken and beaten, dysfunctional, antisocial, and I can just come to this place and sit with these people and do a few things and everything's going to be honky-dory, right? Like, that's the message.
Yeah.
The promise is freedom and the message is hope. That's a great marketing slogan.
For sure.
Right. But the fact of the matter is, like, there's so much more that needs to be done within that. And so, I got to a place similar to you where it's like, this is it. And I remember my first time around, right? Like, I had 7 years and I had the house and I had the job and I had the stuff. And on all accounts, my life had been rebuilt. And I remember I was crying in my living room at 7.5 years sober, and more emotional and spiritual and psychic pain than I had ever been in. Because I lived under this delusion. I lived under this belief that once I do these things, I'm going to get to this place. And once I get to this place, then everything is going to be okay. Everything wasn't okay.
Right.
And I didn't know what else to do. And I became resentful and I withdrew. And so I just fell back into what I knew, which is really just selfish and self-centered and what I know now to be antisocial behavior.
Right.
Narcissistic behavior.
Yeah.
And eventually it led me to drinking and using again.
Right.
And when I came back after 3 years, what you were describing earlier is being done. Yeah, there was a level of willingness and understanding that I had. My experience, though, was that it was challenging because I had 10 years of previous experience. So I wasn't coming in brand new. So some of the stuff that I was hearing, I was calling bullshit on it.
Even though I'm not sober.
And the elders were like, well, you can't say that. And I'm challenging them and they didn't like being challenged. Just like
Right.
elders in the church don't like being challenged when you're coming there with a little bit of knowledge.
Right.
Right. I may not have been fully free, but I couldn't discount the knowledge. Like today I walk in a space, or I do my best to walk in a space where even if someone doesn't have whatever, right? Like they may not have the time or the this or the that, or they may be earlier in their spiritual journey. I'm more apt to see where they are correct,
Right.
than to bully them and say, well, you don't know, you haven't been there, you haven't this and you haven't that. And so like that kind of stuff stopped working for me.
Yeah. People do that in AA a lot.
Yeah. And so I couldn't, and that was my experience with church also. And that's why I was like, I can't do this anymore, because the rigidity, the need for control in order to keep this organism rolling. I personally believe, and this is just my belief, this is my interpretation, is that level of control is put up by fear.
Yeah. And 100%, right? So as you're saying this, I'm like, I was absolutely borderline narcissistic, sociopathic borderline for sure when I got here, and probably for a long time during, like, and I would take people, I understood the mechanics of the book and the steps and how, and can speak clear, right? So I can convey this message of understanding to people, and so people start coming to me for support, right? Take them through the steps, be their sponsor. And I was doing it from a real sociopathic place, from a real, like, I don't want what you got, you're coming to me for help, right? And I was like, I look back now, it was like toxic as fuck, right? But I didn't know any better. And there's nobody overseeing like who's giving the help to who here, right? It's just like anybody. And then you have people, these people, they're coming in, they're so desperate for help, and they're like, well, but my sponsor says, I'm like, your sponsor's a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? Like that's who you're taking your life advice from, or you were taking life advice from me at this time? Like, God help you, It's kind of crazy. And so I don't say this to like completely just shit on the 12-step programs, because I wouldn't be alive without it, right? Like I owe a great debt of gratitude for it to keep me alive. I just think that it's really important that just because you've bought into a thing and it's helped you at one time in your life, that there's not more for you out there, right? And I think that's what I discovered. And I had a real like identity crisis about this, because like you hear like, oh, people that stop coming here, they, what happens to them? I think people that stop their spiritual progression will undoubtedly go back into their addictive patterns, right?
100%.
People that stop their personal growth will undoubtedly go back into their addictive patterns. What I discovered for me, well, firstly, addiction is a disease of separation, right? So any sort of addiction is born when a person feels they're breaking in belonging, right? There's a break in belonging that happens, and this person internalizes that about themselves, and they begin finding these ways to cope with that separation, right? That cope of not feeling part of that. It's a way to cope with not belonging, right? And they become over-reliant, and that becomes the only way they know how to feel that sense of belonging, or at least take the pain away from their idea that they don't belong, right? And I firmly believe that that's where all addiction is born from.
Bro, you just described the human condition.
Yeah.
Because I can take exactly what you just said, and I can apply that to people's experience in 12-step, people's experience in church,
right?
People's experience in this country today, trying to decide between two old motherfuckers and which unfit old motherfucker is fit enough to lead us, right? And we were talking about this before the podcast, is like, there is a level of cognitive dissonance that I need to have in order to justify me not going deeper. Yeah. And when I say not going deeper, is justify me not taking responsibility and accountability for my life. Right. The fact, though, is when I first got here, when I'm new, whether I'm new to a faith, or if I'm new to a belief, or I'm new to a way of living, my capacity to be accountable and responsible is very, very low. So I'm spoon-fed baby food.
Yeah. Somebody save me.
Somebody save me. I need baby food. The problem is that people just stay eating baby food.
Right.
That is incongruent with how we grow as people. You start on titty milk
Mm-hmm.
or formula, and then you do baby food, and then some semi-soft,
Right.
semi-solid food, and then solid food, right? And so I think one of the biggest inherent challenges is, as I see it, the lack of willingness to grow and really becoming accountable and responsible. And as I become accountable and responsible, baby food is unattractive to me.
Right.
It should be unattractive to me
Yeah.
because I'm not a fucking baby anymore.
Right.
And so where I'm stuck and where I'm perplexed oftentimes is like, how and where do I share that message?
Huh. So I want to get this out of my head before I forget it, because as you say that, what I think happens, and this is what I notice, right? I'm one of those people that questions everything. Okay.
Yes, you are.
And
if you guys don't know that, I'm telling you
I
right
think
now,
what happened for
everything.
me is I stopped questioning after a certain period of time. I thought this was it, right? And when I stopped questioning and this became it, I became dogmatic once I stopped questioning, right? And I became dogmatic. This is the way to do it. You motherfuckers are killing alcoholics by saying whatever you're saying in rooms. And like, that's how I was walking around like that, and everybody else is doing it wrong. And then my life wasn't working. And so I had to start questioning again. And then I got introduced to going a little bit deeper into some other forms of work that I got dogmatic about those too, right? And like, this is the way, right? And it's like, when people get stuck in these places, when they stay eating baby food, it's because they're not taking responsibility. Do I actually believe this, or am I willing to ask some questions here? Like, am I willing to question, this worked for me at a time, is this still working for me?
How about this? Has a space been created for you to ask that question?
Yeah. It's somebody, but even if it hasn't, right? Even if it hasn't, some people may never open up a space for you to ask that question, right? It wasn't opened up for me. I just opened it myself, right? So I think we can support people by opening up the space for them. I think that's how we, to your point before, that's how we convey that message. We open up the space for people to ask questions, right? Without making them wrong for asking the question, right? What does this actually mean to you right now, right? And support them with how to reflect honestly about things, like how to reflect honestly about anything. To honestly reflect is a skill set. Like the ability to be really honest with oneself. There's so much internal dogma that people have to work through. Like, so I work with a lot of people in my coaching practice. I work with a lot of people that have done a lot of work. Okay. And when we sit down and we'll be in a session, there'll be a disconnect between what their emotional experience is and them telling themselves they shouldn't feel like that because their work previously tells them, well, no, that's wrong. I still shouldn't be holding my parents responsible, or I still shouldn't be angry about this. I should be past that already. And so they talk themselves out of the anger that they're actually in. And so they're not really being honest about their experience. When you point that out to them, or when I point that out to them, sometimes they're astonished, right? I despise the term gaslighting for a lot of reasons, right? Because I think it's just overly disagreeing.
So there's a specific definition of it. And like a lot of things, it's been... gaslighting has gone the way of terms like woke and other things that we've talked about.
It's misused terribly.
It's way misused.
But when you're talking yourself out of your own experience, right, you're gaslighting yourself, right? When I tell you that didn't happen to you, or that's not what you experienced,
right?
That's gaslighting.
The definition of gaslighting.
That is the definition of gaslighting. Disagreeing with you or telling you I think you're full of shit is not gaslighting.
No. And it's as you bring that up, like, one of the pitfalls that I fell into, because we've both done a lot of the similar work, not just 12-step work, but other stuff that we're both into. As I gained more self-knowledge, right, a more awareness about myself, one of the pitfalls that I fell into was exactly that, is that there's a term that has been said in 12-step fellowships. I don't know if it's still said. The longest distance that an addict or an alcoholic travels is 18 inches. Yeah. From the head to the heart.
Right.
And so as I do this work, the pitfall that I fell into was, now I have all this knowledge. So I stopped operating from here. Yeah. And I started operating back from up here. right? And justifying and you were with me on a 6-month journey recently and doing some shadow work. And one of the biggest challenges, and I knew it going in, that I was at a place of willingness where it's like, I can talk myself out of this experience.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk myself out of this experience because I've acquired enough knowledge where I can call out my behavior and not be emotionally attached to it whatsoever.
Right.
And so all I'm doing is processing from here. Mm-hmm. It was a similar experience I had in 12-step fellowships. It is a similar experience that I had in church, is that I had acquired enough knowledge where I could, recite scripture. I can recite, different parts of the big book or the NA basic text. And so on the outside, or to the casual observer, I know what the hell I'm talking about. I've spoken in front of thousands of people and shared my story.
Right.
And some of my deepest, darkest stuff and have zero emotional connection to it whatsoever.
It's like a weird way to dissociate.
Yeah, it's totally, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I'm like, some people, they dissociate. Like, I work with people that dissociate and they like go somewhere else. Right. You know what I mean? You're like consciously telling the story, but completely disconnected from it.
Disconnected. And then I learned how to like finesse my story. Like I learned that like in my like 20s, how I would share my story. I would go down to the clubs downtown and finesse girls.
Yeah.
Right. Cause it's like, I'm this sober guy. I'm still hanging out in the club. I'm sitting there sharing my story. Right. And then, I did all these things. And now I work with kids and I'm sober and their pussy's getting wet and this and that. And I'm like the best thing ever. Right. Like, so there was never a level of true honesty within myself. So I think that's what's really, it's important. Yeah. It's like, get honest about being dishonest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, to what extent am I continually willing to get honest about being dishonest?
For sure.
Like, I never get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm never like super sober.
Yeah.
Like, what is it to be saved? Saved from what? All I have is this moment right now.
That's right.
5 minutes from now, I can make a certain set of decisions based off of feeling a certain type of way.
Right.
And it will change everything that's going on.
Sure.
Right. And so I believe it's really important to get honest about that. Where am I willing to be honest? Right. And am I willing to surround myself with people that are going to hold me accountable for what I say and what I do?
Yeah.
Am I willing to be honest enough and vulnerable enough to be in community with others?
Right. Yeah. And I feel like I love that. And I think this type of work, this type of creating honesty with ourselves, I think it does. It's great if you have an innate ability to be self-honest, but I think also,
I don't know anybody that's got an innate ability to be self-honest. I think they have like there's stuff there.
Right. Well, maybe it's easier for them than other people will say, right? But having people around us, right, to reflect back to us, not from a place of I know what's true for you, because I don't know what's true for you, but I can reflect back to you. I think you're lying to yourself. And I don't know what the truth is, but I don't think you're being fully honest with yourself, or I don't think that you're fully stepping into what you're capable of, right? And now with that information, can you reflect upon that and see what's actually true for you, what you're actually holding back, right? What you actually feel about the situation versus what you say, how you want to be seen versus how you actually feel, how you're trying to constantly, or how I'm trying to constantly manipulate how you see me. And I'm doing that by letting you think that I think about things a certain way or I feel about things a certain way. And so like when that's my whole way of getting by, when that's my whole gimmick, when that's my whole worldview is manipulating how outside is going to receive me, man, I really lose touch with what's true for me.
100%.
Yeah.
And, and if, what I've learned is, we're talking about these things. For me, my belief, one of the, there's lies out there that we tell ourselves, or that is told, that everything that I need in order to be happy, joyous, and free exists within the walls of AA or NA. Mm-hmm. My experience is that's bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are people, family members, that are currently experiencing situations where they think just because they go to church and they're and they're, employed by the church and all of these things that that's all they need.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, a direct result of that belief is my child suffering.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And do I have that conversation with my ex-wife and her husband? See, like, these are things I can talk to you and I can say on a podcast that I would never say years ago, because I'd be too afraid of who's going to see this.
Yeah.
What are they going to think? What kind of backlash am I going to get? Right? Like, I'm free of that today in this moment. But what I know is, and it's not that my ex-wife and her husband are bad people. They're not bad people at all. But they're only willing to go to a certain level and go deep enough to do certain things and won't take accountability or responsibility for these other things. And I identify with that because I've done the same thing in my life. And so I think that's one of the biggest inherent problems, is that we look for that singular solution.
Right.
I'll go back to what I said about absolution.
Right.
I want to be absolved. Let me find one place.
Right.
Let me find one political party. Let me find one president. Let me find one social organization.
Is what they want.
I want certainty.
Yeah.
I want it to be neat.
Yeah. So I have to think about this again.
I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
My only responsibility is in showing up and just doing a set number of things, and then everything is supposed to be okay.
I go my way.
Right? And so that's not how it works. There's levels to this shit. And so for me, and it sounds like for you, it's like I got to a certain point where I went through spiritual kindergarten and I went through spiritual elementary school. But after all of these years, I'm at the collegiate level. I'm at the graduate level. It doesn't mean I've graduated. It just means my learning, my growth necessitates that I do things and learn things and challenge myself in ways that are going to take me from here to the next level. I can't go to the next level, right? Like, if I'm a high schooler, I can't go to the next level going back to kindergarten or fourth grade. If I'm trying to get my PhD, I'm not going back to my undergrad. Right? Like, I got to keep leveling up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the way that I've started to look at it, as opposed to maybe leveling up, is I've gotten a lot less rigid, right?
Yeah.
And the rigidness has opened me up, right? So when I'm open, I can see the opportunities that are there, right?
Yes.
When I'm closed and it's got to look like this, then I can only see within the box, right, that I've put things in. So if I have a box and that's my scope, right, and the scope is real narrow, and that's my where I can pick things out of, where I can see opportunity. Man, I'm missing so much when I just stay in the confines of something. And that's not to say, like, don't have disciplines and stuff like that. I have disciplines that support me, right? Sure. That I show up to regularly, whether I feel like it or not, right? But I'm also open. I'm open to the fact that, man, there's so many things out there, right? And if I close myself off to what could be supportive to me, to what could be supportive to another, I'm missing so much. I'm missing so much. And I think, like, letting the rigidity of my practice go to the side a little bit, not having to be so rigid, I'm at peace. Because with the rigidity, at least for me, comes I have to. If I'm not doing this, I'm doing it wrong. Right? I have to do it this way. I have to do it that way. And I'm not saying that there's no structure to my life. There's a lot of structure to my life. I'm not saying I don't have discipline. I'm not saying that I'm not responsible and accountable. I try to be all those things to the utmost of my ability. But opening myself up to honestly see and honestly reflect, right, without needing to stuff it into a box. And so I do want to just reiterate this, right? If you have a substance abuse problem, right, or an addiction problem, 12-step programs can save your fucking life.
100%.
Right? Can save your fucking life. And absolutely go check those out. But do it with an open mind, and perhaps do it with the willingness to ask questions, right? And don't be afraid to challenge things.
Yeah, man. Like, what comes to me is building a foundation. And so, we're talking about 12-step programs or recovery-related things from substance abuse or whatever kind of pathological. It could be gambling, it could be eating, whatever it is. Developing that foundation is really, really important.
Yeah.
And again, I use the example of church. Hell, I can use the example of, the self-improvement in the wellness community, right?
Oh, yeah, all that. Dude, there's traps in the conscious community, the love and light people.
Don't get me started.
We'll have another episode about that.
And unfortunately, as someone that used to work in the industry.
What industry? Can you clarify? Just for the audience?
In the treatment industry.
Okay, and just give them just a quick your experience, just so they know where you're coming from.
I started programs, adolescent programs. I worked as a program manager, director of business development, interventionist, line staff. I mean, I've done.
Right. So this is in the context of like rehab, sober houses, stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
Behavioral health, alcohol and drug addiction, for adolescents and for adults, for on and off for over 20 years.
Right. Just wanted to add that context.
Yeah.
Saying.
Thank you for challenging me, because I would not have said it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it just is what it is. I mean, we're talking about a $30+ billion a year industry. And it's one of the reasons why I got out of the industry, because what I saw happening was it became, in certain respects, more about the money than the actual welfare of the patients and assessing them properly to get them the appropriate level of care to get the things that they needed in order to create that foundation and rebuild their life.
Versus what's cost effective.
Versus heads and beds.
Yeah.
It's a term that they use in the industry. Heads and beds, heads and beds, heads and beds. And some of your listeners may be some of my former colleagues. And if they get their jaws tight, they get their jaws tight.
Yeah. A lot of people are going to be mad at this podcast, and that's okay.
It just is. And so the benefit to those treatment centers, and people talk, mad shit about treatment centers and the cost and everything and this and that. People talk mad shit about AA. People talk mad shit about the church. People talk mad shit about the conscious community or Tony Robbins or this or that. People are going to talk shit about stuff either that they don't understand, they had a bad experience, they weren't willing to do the work to get the results that they were promised, right? The fact of the matter is all of these entities, all of these things serve a place, or I found it serve a place in helping to create a foundation for the individual. They help create a foundation for me. Where I got to, and I hope this is what I get to convey, and I want to convey to you and your listeners, is that gaining that foundation is really, really important. What's equally important is, as you said, continuing to be open. And vulnerable and challenge myself to be more. And there's going to be times what I call succumb to the disease of the satisfied stomach. And what the disease of the satisfied stomach is I'm going to do enough work because I'm here, I'm at this point, right? And so whether it is I want to save a relationship or get in a relationship or get a job or get a house or be socially acceptable or all of those things, right? I get to a place where I get these things because those things do happen in my life. If I stop being antisocial, if I start being responsible, then I'm going to gain, those fruits, right? Some people, as long as they have steak on the table and ice cream in the freezer, everything is all good. Yeah. Right? And so that's the disease of the satisfied stomach. It's I've gotten to this certain level, and so I'm satiated, even though there's more that I would like to have in my life. The pain of remaining the same is not greater than the pain of change.
Yeah. And as I hear you saying that, and I've thought about this before, I think what this all boils down to, whether you're in a 12-step program, whether you're in some other kind of personal development work, right? I think where I really started to kind of transcend the modality that I was working in is just taking ownership over my journey, right? So not putting the ownership on AA, right? Or NA or any of these other A's, right? Not putting the ownership on the leadership training or the emotional intelligence training, not putting the ownership on them to do it to me, right? But that there are tools here that can be helpful, right? Let me let me take responsibility to fully explore what's true for me here, what's meaningful to me here. Let me expose myself to feedback, to criticism, to anything that could come back at me, to reflections that could support me, right? Let me expose myself to all that and see what's true. Let me take ownership over what's true instead of taking your version of what's true. Because so much in the past, and I think this may just be a normal part of this journey, I was letting other people dictate what's true for me. Right. Some people I respected. Right.
Right.
The people I looked up to, my mentors, right. I'm like, oh, they said it. It must be true. Right. And then I'm going,
they had something you wanted.
They had something I wanted. Right. And then I look back, I'm like, wow, you know what? I actually don't know if I actually agree with that. And that actually, I think I see it a little bit differently, and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay that I see it differently. It's okay that I'm having my own journey, and it doesn't mean that this person wasn't supremely helpful to me and that they didn't absolutely impact me in fantastic ways, but it's also okay to challenge that. It's also okay for me to have my own ideas about it, right? And I think that's like, I think that boils it down. It's like, whatever you're doing, take ownership for it.
Yeah, man. It's obviously easier said than done.
For sure.
But yeah, because, I've had mentors that were instrumental, have been instrumental in my life. Don't talk to them as often.
Right.
Check in every now and then, see what they're doing and stuff like that. They were what I needed at that time. And what I realized is where I suffer is when I get attached to a relationship being a certain type of way forever.
Yeah.
Any relationship, whether it's with my family, with romantic partners, with my friends, with mentors, regardless of what it is, it's like the need in order to make sense of it or create a semblance of safety attached to this idea that it has to look like this.
Yeah.
And as I grow, it's going to look different. Am I willing to, for me, what I've learned is, am I willing to release my attachment to this relationship? Like, I know some people, and you know some of the same people right now, like that are in our community that are really struggling. These are people that are in their first 5 or 6 years of their recovery journey. And, they came into this thing and it was a certain way. I know, and you know from our experience, it's like you start with this group and then you outgrow.
That's right.
And it doesn't make people right or wrong. We want to make them right or wrong, right? I want to make them right or wrong.
It's easy.
It's easy, right? But the fact is like what I needed in that relationship at that time served me.
Right.
It no longer serves me. So, you and I talk about right and wrong thinking, oftentimes. And, where I've come to now, and it'll probably evolve, is that rather than getting into right and wrong, just merely asking myself, does this serve me?
Right. Work. Does it work?
Does it work? Does it not work? It might have worked at one time. It's not working now.
Yeah.
When I start working out, it's like baby weights. And after a while, baby weights don't cut it anymore.
Right.
I need more and more.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, right? Like, am I willing to be open, like you said? Am I willing to release attachment to this idea of what I think it needs to look like in order for me to be okay? And so as this journey has progressed for me, it was learning to ask that deeper question.
Right. Yeah.
Is, what are the things that I need in my life in order to be okay? And what I began to see is I needed all these fucking things in my life in order to be okay. So I wasn't in control of my life at all.
Exactly the way I need them.
Right? So I had no control over my life. My emotional baseline was predicated on how you behaved,
circumstances,
how Max behaved, how this person behaved, how that person behaved. It was all about my circumstance. And if my circumstance was not to my liking, if you were not fulfilling the role that I assigned to you, even though I didn't tell you up front what role I assigned to you,
doing this for me.
But you're supposed to be doing this role. And people hear me when I say this, right? Like, we assign people roles, and you may be shaking your head yes or no as you're listening to this or watching this podcast, right?
My wife's supposed to make me feel like this.
That's right.
She's supposed to do this.
That's right.
And my husband's supposed to do
That's
that.
right.
My kids are supposed to make
I
me feel
never
like
tell
this.
them. I never tell them the role that I've assigned them. And as long as they're fulfilling that role, everything is cool.
Cool.
But as soon as they stop fulfilling that role, which invariably people will do because we're all fallible, we all fail each other, we'll all go off the script. And as soon as we go off the script, there's smoke in the city, right? And so, like, my attachment to this script, my attachment to this level of dishonesty, of inauthenticity.
Yeah.
If I'm not allowing myself to go deeper and ask myself these questions, then I can't come to you authentically.
Yeah.
As I've learned to come authentically, the questions that you talk about with 12-step fellowships and other places and keeping them in question and seeing what works and doesn't work, I think is a natural evolution of as I gain more authenticity within myself. When I first got here, there was no authenticity.
I had no idea.
So like it was easy for them to tell me what to do.
For sure.
Even if I bucked it because, you know, as a parent, I know, and as someone that, you know, worked with adolescents for a long time, young people crave structure.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they rebel against it,
100%.
they crave structure. Right? Like we live in a society.
They crave that masculine guiding energy.
They do, whether they believe it or not.
They believe it or not.
Right? And so like we live in a time which is very, very interesting, which is probably a conversation for another time, but I'm going to say it because this is who I am. It's the first time in my life. I'll be 52 in 2 months. It's the first time in my life I've seen so many people crave or clamor for individualism and not and rebel against structure. And what's interesting about that is like when I worked with adolescents and they would rebel against structure, but what they wound up finding is they would thrive in it. Right? Like if we just if we let the wheels fall off like they asked, they didn't know what to do. And then eventually they started asking for structure, right? So at a point, structure is very, very important in terms of personal development, particularly in the beginning, because if I don't have any guideposts, if I don't have any identity, right, I need that help in shaping my identity. We live in a time where we're celebrating individualism more than we are community, and we wonder why we have so much angst and problems.
Motherfuckers are lonely.
And so I see that, you know, what happens in recovery is the same thing. All it is a microcosm, you know, of what's going on in the society at large. And so with all of this individualism, there's no sense of community.
Yeah.
Or what we wind up doing is creating dysfunctional communities based off of where we're at, thinking that's going to meet our needs, but it winds up not meeting our needs.
I find dysfunctional communities are generally the only thing that connects them is their labels.
Sure.
Right? They connect based off a label. And
I did that for a long time.
Ideology.
I did that for a long time in AA. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
But there was a period in my life where I identified myself as an alcoholic, and I have not identified that way for many, 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 many years.
Yeah.
Yes, I had a substance abuse problem.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that I'm powerless over substances once I put them in my body. The awareness of choice ceases to exist.
Yeah.
The phenomenon of craving takes over and all bets are off.
Right.
But to identify myself, for me, to identify myself as an alcoholic or an addict is a limiting belief. For me to identify as a liar, a cheat, and a thief.
Yeah, you're a lot. You know, you're a sober horse thief and like all that.
You
bullshit
know, I can't. You know, when I was in my 20s, like that was the hip, slick, and cool thing to say. Like it's like, oh, I'm identified as a liar, cheat, and a thief. As I got older, as I gained more experience, I realized like, yo, if I've been doing this work for X amount of years, and I'm still labeling myself a liar, a cheat, and a thief,
or you'll always be a drunk,
that I haven't grown. Yeah. Right? Like I understand where that comes from, and that fear comes from.
It is fear. That is a fear-driven belief.
It's a fear-driven belief that, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, there was the Scared Straight program.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. It did not work. but we had the Scared Straight program. And the same thing I see in church, and the same thing I see in 12-step fellowships is a Scared Straight type of messaging. Obviously, there's more underneath it as far as support and stuff like that to help people, but there is a Scared Straight, and I don't necessarily think initially that messaging is bad as a like, hey, wake up.
Right. Yeah, it can have some value.
Right. But just that in and of itself.
Incomplete.
Completely incomplete. And so that I find is the challenge. But yeah, so like that's how I identified at one point in my life. I don't identify like that anymore. Right. I was limiting myself to a lot of the beauty in the world.
Yeah.
A lot of the experience of people in the world simply because they were normies or simply because they were Christian or simply because they were Muslim.
Right.
You know, and you know, I mean, and I've practiced several different religions in my life, and as I start to attach my identity to these specific groups, and I only allow myself to operate within a specific group, I believe I start to die.
Yeah. Well, I'm limited, right? And I once I affix to a label, right, as if that's the absolute of who I am, right? Yeah, I don't leave much room for anything else, even for myself. I don't leave much room for myself to experience more of myself.
Bro,
right?
I cut people off.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not doing it this way, you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah, you're the
and I can't fuck with you.
Yeah. I talked about this last time, and I'll say this again. Your labels tell me nothing about you.
No.
Right? If you're to tell me I'm Demond, a black such and such, okay, you tell me the color of your skin, right? If I'm supposed to guess your experience as a human being because you have black skin, all that tells me is my interpretations about what it means to have black skin. I don't know. Right? You could have a completely different experience than some other people. You could have a completely different cultural experience than some other people, right? If you tell me that you're cisgendered, you're non-binary, that literally tells me nothing. It gives me some information, but again, it's my interpretation of that. Like, tell me about your life experience, right? Or tell me about your hopes and dreams. What do you want to create? Tell me about your fears. Like, now you're telling me something about you. But if I just go based off the labels, literally nobody knows me and I'm a caricature, right? And then you're supposed to act a certain way because I give you these labels. That's nonsense, right? And it breaks human connection.
100%.
Right? So if we're talking to each other, and I could be just as guilty of this as anybody else, if we're talking based on labels, I'm not actually meeting you as a human being. I'm meeting an idea of you, right? And that is the opposite of being present.
And oftentimes a misinterpretation.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interpretation, right? None of it's based off fact. It's all completely subjective. So I just want to say this because as you were talking, about the need for structure and the need for how much young people actually do thrive within structure even when they reject it, right? And even some people we know that reject structure, right? And they're just, I don't want to be told what to do, and their lives are clearly fucking falling apart, right? For so long, I would find these mentors, right? And I craved mentorship probably because I craved a father figure more than anything. And these guys would have this profound impact on me, and then I would find out that they were human, and they would let me down in some way, right? They would let me down in some way, and it would often cause like a break in the relationship. Like I couldn't handle the disappointment, and I would often, they're a fucking fraud, and I would just like kind of go my own way. It would happen with sponsors, it would happen with coaches, it would happen with a lot of different people, and it's like I reflect on that now. I'm like, oh man, I wanted somebody to take that role and be perfect at it so badly because I didn't know how to take responsibility for it myself, right? And it's like, yeah, we need mentorship, and we do need support as human beings. We need more than just ourselves, right, to get through this. But the minute we place the responsibility on that other person to fulfill that role completely and to never let us down, man, we're headed for dangerous waters. Like, one of the things I tell my clients is like, I want to do such a good job that you don't need me anymore.
Sure.
Right. And some people just like to have somebody in their corner to bounce things off to, especially if they have like high powered fucking guys and they've got, their decisions are important and they just need somebody to bounce things off of when they've got, totally get that. Right. But what I don't want is somebody to become reliant upon me as if like I can't go on without that person. That's not good mentorship. Right.
When I was doing those things, I've done those exact same things and I've had that done to me. And what I realized, and it was, this poet, I think I sent it to you the other day, and one of the things that the sister said was that, and she was talking with respect to relationships and how women show up and how they want men to show up, and ultimately what she said is, you just want to come as you are, you ladies just want to come as you are, but you're looking for God
right
in a man.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're talking about is I was doing that when I had mentors or leaders of whatever organization that I was involved with. And I found out that, whether it was infidelity or lying or embezzlement or whatever the thing was, or they popped off, and it blew my picture. My first sponsor, I had moved to San Diego in 96. I had like about a year and a half sober. And I get a phone call that he died. He had 27 years sober. And he went out.
Wow.
First shot, hot shot.
Wow.
I could not in my head, like, how does someone with 27 years go out? Like that doesn't happen. Like you're cured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I was thinking. I was looking for perfection. I was looking for God
right
in a man. I've lived my life, if I'm honest, I lived my life looking for that perfection of another human, in another human being that is supposedly only reserved for God. There's no room for fallibility.
right
There's no room for imperfection. And as I look deeper, because if there's imperfection, then ultimately I have to be accountable and responsible. I'm going to keep going back to this, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I have to be accountable and responsible for my life. And what I really am asking for is absolution.
Right.
I'm looking for something perfect to wash away my sin, to have done the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. To sit at the right hand for God. I don't know how long. Sit forever. Can't take a shit, can't go to the bathroom, but we won't get into Jesus right now.
Right.
But someone's just someone to sit. The work has been done. It's over with. I don't have to do it. All I have to do is show up.
Right.
And the fact is like, that's just not my experience of how things work.
Right.
To the precise extent that I am responsible and accountable for the things that happen within my life. And I'm willing to be open.
Right.
And vulnerable.
Yes.
I got action.
Right.
I got action at growth. I got action at healing. I got action at change. It may not go the way that I think it's supposed to go. It may not go the way that I wanted it to go. But I oftentimes find the things that I wanted when I had 30 days sober are not the things that I want now. Because my thinking at that time.
I just wanted a mansion and a bunch of lesbians.
Word.
You know what I mean? And I would have been straight. But you'd
be horrified if you had all of that right now. Right? So it's like the things that I wanted then was based off of the understanding of a young, hurt, fragile, scared boy. Yeah. Right. And so as I've grown, like, those aren't the things that I want anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I used to want what other people have. I don't want what other people have. I just want what's meant for me. And I understand the difference today is like, no, like your stuff is yours. My individualism only extends to the point that like, I know I'm a precious creation. I've had my experience and my experiences have got me to where I am right now. And that there's things that I continue to, that I get to work on. That there are attachments that I have that come up, and I have people like you in my life that call me forth to take a look at that stuff, right? And so with that, I have action for continual growth. We were at a place in our relationship where there was stagnation, and if there wasn't work done, we would not be sitting here today.
No, probably not. Yeah.
Right? It's like, so there's always a need for growth and evolution. The kind of conversations you and I used to have 12, 13 years ago
For sure.
are not the conversations that we're having today.
No, it wouldn't work. I'd be like, I mean,
You
it's like going back to my neighborhood and like, I'll catch up with some of the homies and it's cool. It's great to see them. And then once we get past, reminiscing and whatnot, it's like, sometimes there's not a whole lot being built and they just want to stay on what was. And
it doesn't make them wrong.
It doesn't make them wrong or bad.
It's nothing.
It's just, it's not
where you at.
Super fulfilling to me at this point in time. I still love them. They're still a dear part of my past and part of the fabric of who I am. Right. But, it's just like relationships change and they're not always going to stay the same. And I'm okay with that. I don't feel no type of way about it.
And so what you just described is my current experience with 12-step fellowships.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean that I don't go to meetings at times, because I do.
Right.
I'm still connected with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I love them dearly.
Yeah, tons of our just like most of my community is sober.
And I love that because it's like I have a huge community of like-minded people in Los Angeles, in the Bay Area, Europe, the East Coast,
everywhere,
right? Like, so the beautiful thing is like that, going back to the foundation, I built a foundation that there's literally almost nowhere in the world I can't go and find a like-minded person, which means there's almost nowhere in the world I can't go and have community. Right. Like that. It's that's 100%. Extreme. So I want to, make sure the viewers, hear that. It's like community is really, really important. It doesn't mean that I have to maintain that relationship in the same way that I used to.
Yeah. Or give up my ownership of my journey for the community.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. I enjoyed that conversation and even just got to think about and reflect some things like, I actually didn't really look at it like that, but I see how that could be there. And I hope the audience enjoyed the conversation, and people are going to listen to this, and a lot of sober people are going to listen to this. And I think my invitation is, if this upsets you, right, just ask yourself why it upsets you. And I'm free to have a conversation. You can leave your conversations in the comments, and we'd be happy to respond to them. Like, I want to hear what this dialogue sparks in people, and I'm open to the conversation, whatever it is.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. And I mean, I think it's an important conversation to have. Like, if we're not continually challenging ourselves and staying in question, as we like to call it, then how do we expect to continue to grow?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the name of the game, right? Grow, thrive, enjoy our lives, and help other people do that. So that's it for this episode, guys. Again, if you like the content, like, share, subscribe, please spread the word, and we'll see you guys next time.
Peace.